Welcome to the first episode of Off Panel, the new creator-centric comic podcast from Sketched. On our first show, we have a very special guest, the artist of Chrononauts and the upcoming Tokyo Ghost, Sean Murphy. Thanks for coming on, Sean.
Thanks for having me, man. It's a pleasure to be your first inaugural person.
Yeah. Well, you're obviously one of the bigger names in comics right now, but the reason why I actually have Sean on today isn't to talk about just, his art. It's actually to talk about something in regards to a column we ran this week, which is, the business behind comic art. Because it's a big part of comics that a lot of people I don't really think about, and from everything I've seen, Sean, you're definitely one of the creators that it seemingly thinks more about that side of things, and seems like a little bit brighter when it comes to the decisions you make behind the business of your comic work. Is that something you actively think about when you're
Yeah.
thinking about your next projects?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the kind words. It's funny, I've actually toned down my rhetoric the past few years just because a lot of people, I don't think they saw it as soapboxing, and I was really just trying to help when I write blogs or talk about this stuff. But I felt like by starting my apprenticeship, which we'll probably get into later, I could just take the small percentage that really is interested in learning and just tell them basically. But now that I've got Chrononauts and all this other stuff, I try to stay out of comic book politics. I guess the last few years, just because I have more to lose.
Yeah, but I totally understand that. I mean, I always really liked your the blogs you would run on DeviantArt and everything, but it does seem kind of it seems like an important subject that not a lot of people think about. And one of the things, one of the first things I want to talk about actually was a couple of years ago, and I referenced this in a big column I wrote, was you wrote a tweet about how you theorized that 50% of artists or creators work at the poverty line. And I don't know if you remember that. That was just completely random. But I'm working on I just published a survey yesterday, or I will have at that time. And in this survey of the respondents for comic artists, including pencilers, inkers, colorists, letterers, and everything, almost 50% of the people are below the poverty line. And it's pretty much right on with what you said. So I'm curious, why did you originally say that?
I was a lucky guess.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious. I'm trying to look up now what the poverty per household.
It's about $12,000.
How much?
12,000.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, so if that's per household, most comic book artists don't make that. Most of them are working part-time or for free.
Yeah.
So if you take that survey and you're just doing it pro bono, then you're going to skew those numbers. There might be a way to fix the math in a way. People who are contracted, people who work X amount of issues. There might be a better way to zone in on it. But yeah, I think overall, people you see in Artist Alley, most of them don't do it for a full-time job at all. And while they might not be in poverty, maybe their husband or wives are earning, the household income.
Yeah.
Still kind of, it's not paying livable wages.
No, and I believe a number of the respondents also said that they have like second jobs and things like that. So I think there is a fair amount of the people who responded that were, it's comics can be a passion job, but I mean, it seems to me that at least like when you're approaching your work, and granted it's completely different context for you because you've been around for a while and you have a bigger name and everything like that, but when you're figuring out which project you want to take on next, kind of like with Tokyo Ghost coming out next, how important are the financial prospects of it when you're making your decision?
Well, I'll do what I would call money moves, and then I'll do like artistic moves. Actually, I think George Clooney does this. He does a gig for them, quote unquote, a gig for him, and he'll alternate. And when you see his movies come out, you can see like, oh, that's clearly for the studio. And then something that's really small will come out and go, oh, that's probably for him. And I felt like I've been trying to do that. So Punk Rock Jesus for me would have been my me book.
Yeah.
Because I didn't think it was marketable. I knew it would make a lot of money. I just had to get it off my chest. But then I signed on to the Wake and to Chrononauts and to Tokyo Ghost as sort of the money move,
Right.
uh, quote unquote. But that's only because Image is doing so well. Those moves 5 years ago wouldn't have been money moves. Now they are. Now somebody who's in my position probably lose money by working for Marvel and DC. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's weird. I mean, I'm fortunate enough where I think that whatever I do, I'd probably make the same as what I'm used to. It's
Hmm.
probably unlikely I'm going to just call up a smaller publisher and start doing licensed books just for fun. I mean, my wife would kill me if I went down in salary in some way, so I'm always trying to go up. But I don't mind taking those lesser paying gigs if there's some kind of artistic integrity or if there's some kind of emotional benefit to it. But right now, I feel like the iron is hot, so I'm just trying to strike as many times as I can before this image bubble pops.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's one thing you've spoken about before is that you're a pretty big proponent of the creator-owned movement, and it seems like you've done a little bit of for hire work, but it seems like you're pretty all in on creator-owned right now. But strictly from a financial perspective, I mean, it seems like creator-owned is probably a better option for someone like you right now, right?
Oh yeah, right now especially. When I started with Joe the Barbarian, I was lucky to have a pretty decent page rate even before I was sort of discovered on
Yeah.
that book, and I just ended up, getting onto some Vertigo properties that paid pretty decently back when Vertigo was still doing as well as it, before it's had I don't know what you want to call it the last few years, but
You're
they're
in a bit of a
in a
slump, I
false.
guess.
Yeah, okay, you could say false. And I love there, and I love DC. So if anyone's listening, I'm sorry.
Those were my
But
words. I apologize.
okay, no, it's okay. It's all right, man. But it's I just got lucky. I managed to find creator-owned stuff that happened to pay the bills, and I mean, there's very rare. Those opportunities are very rare, but I ended up sort of getting offered them and sort of doing the best I could. And I wouldn't be good at doing a mainstream like, Avengers, uh, slugfest. I don't follow the costumes as well. I don't think I'd be good at it. It would probably drive me crazy. So for me, it's creator owned or nothing, or
Yeah.
maybe like a Batman or a Daredevil, or something smaller, but never a big team book.
Yeah. Has that, obviously when you first started, the context is completely different, but how is that kind of, not just the creator owned part, but like, factoring finances into the decision? Like, has the whole one for me, one for them thing always been kind of your MO, or is that just something that's kind of come along in the last few years, post Joe the Barbarian and things like that?
Yeah, well, okay. So I think when I first started to feel confident that I was going to make a living and I wasn't going to, disappear in comics again. It was before Punk Rock Jesus. So I had this team of Joe behind me. I had done a American Vampire sort of mini series,
Yeah.
and I felt confident, but I knew I had to write Punk Rock Jesus before I did anything else. So I did that knowing it might be a misstep,
Right.
and I didn't know I could write or hold up a book by myself. Um, and I found out that I could, in some capacity anyway. Um, but then, suddenly people were telling me my star was on the rise, which felt good, and I got these offers from Mark Millar and Scott and everybody. So I just thought, well, all right, I've got some heat. I'm just going to keep working as hard as I can and trying to get better each time, because I always fear that the bottom can fall out at some point. So not too many people keep rising. That usually you plateau and then dip off after a certain point. So I'm just trying to sort of make this last as long as I can before someone blows the whistle on me.
Yeah, it seems like that's a common fear amongst artists. Just like, you want your work to be in front of everybody and you don't want to spend like, you know, like a year or two being kind of out of the public's eye because then you kind of lose that heat. And,
Right.
and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think that's kind of the way it is for really any line of work. But it seems like for creator owned, it seems like that's especially important. And do you think that as you move along, you have Tokyo Ghost coming, you have Chrononauts is finishing soon. Do you think that you're going to start moving back more towards that me phase after that, or do you possibly? I don't know. I mean, do you have that kind of plotted out?
Yeah, so I have uh, doing two more mini series of Chrononauts is the plan.
Yeah.
So this time next year, I'll be working on Volume 2. Between now and then, it's Tokyo Ghost. But after Volume 2, I'm probably going to end up doing something with Scott on Batman.
Nice.
Maybe like a mini, like a 6-issue thing, or maybe as part of continuity, or I don't know what Capullo is planning on doing, but if there's like a filler between the next regular artist on Batman, if I can squeeze in there, then something to think about. So that's probably what I'm shooting for afterwards. But I would only do that if I could get the rights to Punk Rock Jesus back.
Yeah.
If I got the rights back, I would do a sequel of that book at Image, and that would be the for me move. If that makes sense.
Oh no, I mean it totally makes sense because Punk Rock Jesus, I mean, down to the fact it was black and white, it really felt more like a passion project than a lot of the other stuff. Not that you're not obviously putting your best in, but it just felt like
Yeah,
something that
yeah,
was 100% you.
yeah. That totally was. I mean, it's when you draw a clone of Jesus telling America to go fuck itself. I mean, only in creator-owned comics would you do that. I cannot believe that a lot of religious readers were fine with that. So it was a good learning experience. I mean, it taught me. I wasn't sure I could pull it off. So even when I was finished that project, it took some distance before I could look back and go, yeah, I didn't sell killer numbers, but that's pre-Saga. That's pre-Image. Boom. If
Yeah.
I did that again, color, I probably would get equal numbers to Punk Rock, or maybe up to where Tokyo Ghost will be, and then I don't have to share it with any writer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a pretty good wild card if you can prove that you don't really need anyone. Not to sound too much of like an isolationist.
Well, no, I mean,
Um,
it makes sense with the way that the creator-owned model is set up. That if you're somebody that can do both the writing and the art and do it successfully, that
right.
it's a great avenue. I mean, and what I was going to say is, based off of your little description there, I'm not surprised that you kind of weren't sure about the commercial nature of Punk Rock Jesus.
Yeah. No, of course not. I mean, the only black and white book that did well was Walking Dead at the time, and the example, no one ever even cited that as a reasonable thing that you could repeat. Not that I was anywhere near those numbers, but I think issue 1 for Punk Rock did like, I don't know, 19. Then we did down on 2. Then we went up on 3, which is extremely rare. Um, yeah, and got a lot of great reviews, and I think it was not a perfect story, but there's a lot of imperfect stories in comics that people seem to tolerate.
Well, and the thing about something like Punk Rock Jesus is it's the type of book that has a long shelf life because I imagine it does really well collected.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, Double in France.
wow.
Yeah, they're not, and for such a small market, they're crazy about that. I'm not really sure why, to be honest.
I've actually heard that from several creator-owned like creators that like some of their books inexplicably do really well in France. Like
Yeah.
Chew, I believe is a book that does very well, and maybe it's just because they're obsessed with food or something. But
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
um, I think Punk Rock Jesus. I mean, down the line, especially if you can take it and kind of have complete control, it would be it's definitely got a lot of potential to get even bigger. But I mean, it helps that it's a great comic. But
Yeah. Oh, thanks, man. And
um,
honestly, I feel like, and I'll say this, having made money writing and drawing a comics, writing comics is, I think, very easy. When writers complain, I don't really tolerate that very. Usually, I'll just keep it to myself, but I don't think writing comics is that hard. I'm
yeah,
only writing for myself, so maybe it's easier for me because I know the artist. But
fairly well. Yeah.
yeah, he's such an asshole. Readers are really rooting for the comics to be good. Like there's a curve in your favor. You can do a few missteps and people will still support you because they want to believe comics aren't going anywhere. They want to believe that we're competitive with movies and video games. So I feel like the bar for writing comics isn't quite as strict as what it might be for a TV show or a movie.
Sure.
It's because it's a comics all have a cult following, and we're all rooting for it to keep going, and no one wants to, get into issue 3 and find that the comic sucks. So they'll give you the benefit of the doubt. And of course, you can still screw up, and I guess with mainstream it would be more difficult because you're playing with other people's toys. For whatever the few problems there were with Punk Rock Jesus, and there were a few, no one really seemed to care. I think they felt like it was attempting something. It was one guy doing it all, give him a break type thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one thing you brought up that I think is actually kind of a, it's a split that I don't think a lot of people think of as being like a firebrand moment for the industry. But I really think like Saga being released, obviously, Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples are just a ridiculously great team. But at the same time, like it seemed like that was the moment where creator-owned really kind of hit the next level.
Yes.
And it seems like from that moment on, if you like, it felt like comics kind of became almost to a certain degree more of a meritocracy. And like, if you're both a creator that's known and a creator that can put out a very good product, you're going to find your audience today. And that I don't think that was true 5 years ago.
No, in fact, I had Punk Rock Jesus accepted at Vertigo, and I was getting the contract to sign it, and I heard murmurs on the street, if you will, about Image possibly having a second coming. And I thought, man, if I sign this contract with Vertigo, it's a stable idea. The Vertigo brand does mean something. They don't just do anything in Vertigo, which was nice. But I might end up looking back in hindsight and feeling like I lost money on Punk Rock Jesus. But this was before Saga come out, so I just went with the safe move, and I went with Vertigo. And I had Karen Berger as my editor, and she really did help me increase that book's quality by a whole grade level.
Yeah.
But I think even if I released it as a C-level book at Image, I probably would have made more money.
Yeah.
But so the book came out the same month, I think, Saga did. And all these reviews were coming in. Of course, Saga sales were kicking my ass. But they had color and a real writer. I joke around with Fiona about this all the time. We're really close. But when that happened, that's when I had to basically accept the fact that I lost money at Vertigo.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to judge it as a misstep or to judge Vertigo or DC or a trend at all. But technically speaking, I think, yes, I did lose money by going with Vertigo.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's comic industry is, if anything, has proven that it's really hard to predict. I mean, 15 years ago, I think pretty much everybody thought comics wouldn't exist in 15 years.
Yeah, I know.
And now it's like, the industry's it's at another high, and like, and that was one thing that I thought was interesting. So you, for Tokyo Ghost, Rick announced the other day that you guys weren't doing variant covers.
Right.
And I thought that was a great decision because like that type of artificiality, not to downplay variants for anybody else, but that type of thing is the type of thing that can sometimes, I mean, it kind of reminds me of the 90s. It was a lot of the business practices that kind of negatively impacted retailers. Was that a decision you guys made together?
I'm glad you brought this up. I was going to write something yesterday. I know I swore off doing blogs like that, but I was going to start saying, like, asking the question, are we being responsible stewards? Or are we making 90s mistakes again?
Right.
And I thought of the things that we're doing better than they did in the 90s. And one of the things is, I think the new, we'll call it Image 2.0. We do respect writing. We do have good influences with the books we've read, movies we've seen. Like, we're not trying to just do TNA, beat 'em up books or rip-offs of X-Men or whatever that you had in the 90s.
Yeah.
So that's probably why we're doing a little better than they did, or at least making it last longer. We also have the 90s mistake, quote unquote, fresh in our minds. Like, we still make fun of all the stuff that they did. And a lot of those people are friends of mine now, so I don't mean to, I'm not trying to offend anybody. But at some point, they did too many variants, and too many holographic covers, and too many issue zeros, and too many whatevers. And it got to be a little bit like you were gouging your reader and just getting greedy. And if we did like we did Chrononauts, we did like 7 variant covers, I think. And that's the only time I've ever done that before. And
Hmm.
I wanted to try it once, and I know Rick's done it on some of his other books. And when we got the numbers back, I had to sell like an extra 1,000 copies of Chrononauts in order to pay Ryan Otley for his variant cover.
Right.
And he's just an example. So I found like I wasn't really making that much more money, me and Mark. I did get more with Fiona's book because she's a superstar,
I
Fiona.
actually,
But
that was the cover I got too.
there you go. So I mean, in a way, I was just talking with Rick about this last few months, and then Image actually came to us last week, or to Rick, and they said it's getting hard to gauge how many readers you actually have. Just
Yeah.
because you sell, 50,000 copies doesn't mean you have 50,000 readers. You have people double, triple dipping sometimes. So when it comes down to issue 2, retailers don't know what the heck to order. So they're going to play it safe, which means the creators, us, we have to overprint
Right.
by 2 to 5,000 copies, store it somewhere, and then hope that the stores come around to order another shipment, or else do a second printing. And doing second printings sucks. You only lose money.
Right.
I can't remember which book it was. Someone at Image was underprinting so they could brag that they went into like seven printings.
Yeah.
And that sounds cool, but really you just lost sales because anyone who went into the store and it wasn't around that week might not have bought it at all.
Yeah.
And it's smarter to print what you need as soon as you can. So I didn't understand that mental process, but
I've actually talked to Eric Stevenson at Image about that very subject, and like I know that the whole underprinting thing just drives him mad because it's just like I mean you want your store, you want your book to be in the stores, and you want it to be reflected in a realistic amount because like you said, like I think a lot of people either don't realize or don't care about the fact that like the retailers really are like they're the customers, they're the most important part of the equation in a lot of ways. And if
right.
if you can't make it so they can order your book in a reflective way of what your comic really is, then it's going to negatively impact every part of that equation.
Right. Yeah, you're
Uh,
right. Yeah, and I think it's good to make an announcement. If that retailer sees it, they'll see you as like a responsible creator.
oh,
I don't
totally.
know. So like a lot of Mark's books were becoming late because of the artists, I believe. And when Chrononauts came out, there was some doubt whether or not it would be on time. I have never been late. I think I was late once, and it was on Punk Rock Jesus, and that was because of Hurricane Sandy and a wedding in the same month. But I felt like saying, really? Like, retailers, like, when have I been late? Like, I am the guy that gets it done.
Right.
You should all know that about me. As if we're a family, which I know we're not.
Hmm.
But when we got hit a little bit by, Millar scheduling doubts, I was a little taken aback because I thought I'd earned retailers' trust, but I don't know.
I think I think part of that is tied to the fact that the artist that Mark typically works with, and no offense to like like Frank Quitely or like Brian Hitch and stuff like that, but I think that they just kind of maybe like they see the Millar World like banner and they're just like, oh boy,
Yeah.
uh-oh. And so like maybe you just got some of that splashback because like you said, I mean, you did the wake and it was on time every time. And didn't you like break your wrist while doing that?
Oh yeah, I had a broken arm for
Broken
an
arm.
issue.
Yeah.
Still
Yeah.
take that,
If,
millennials.
I'm pretty sure if you can be on time when you have a broken arm, you're probably gonna hit your deadlines when you're totally whole. And then on top of that, like didn't you have like a lot of time to build up to it also?
Uh, we were supposed to, but we didn't.
Oh, okay. Well,
Someone at Vertigo, I knew who it was. I won't say her name. Uh, she decided that we needed it out by San Diego, and they jumped the gun on us.
hmm.
And they don't like it when I say jump the gun, but I don't care. That's what they did. So it was too bad because I would have wanted to have taken like 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week to make that book as pretty as I could.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think, did okay, but there was a couple panels where I was just exhausted and I could use a break.
Yeah.
So, but we were on time with the schedule we set. We had a spacer in the middle, I think. But what's strange about that was they collected issues 1 through 4 or 5,
5.
and
Yeah.
sold that as like half of the maxi series. But then they never sold the second half of the maxi collected. They just went and sold everything collected.
Yeah.
So I felt like if you were a buyer, you're waiting for part two, it never came. That kind of stinks. You just blew what $10 or whatever on when if you're just going to buy the trade in the end, you would have just waited.
Yeah, that's not to once again we're both fans of DC Vertigo here, but one of the things I'm actually going to write about this for a future piece, but one of the things that I think is very interesting, especially in the creator-owned world, is like trade release strategy, and
Right,
I think like timing is everything when it comes to a creator-owned book,
right,
and I feel like for a book like let's say you do another volume of Punk Rock Jesus, like if like I feel like even if you release it, let's say a year or two from now, like somehow you become the super god of deadlines and you release it a year or two from now, in the current market, like a trade is going to be so much more important for a book like that.
right.
And like you see, sometimes you see these books get released like 7 months after their last issue or like a year after their last issue, and you're like, I kind of feel like they dropped the ball on that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot that I've learned in the last year that I'd love to talk about, but it's like I'll say this: if you throw too much money in an artist, you do have like drop off. Like 10 artists, if you make them all millionaires overnight, 8 of them will never be on time again.
Right.
Um, and it's almost like giving a basketball player a $3 million contract, who his whole life he's in poverty, and he resigned himself to poverty, and suddenly he's a millionaire. Like no one teaches you how to handle that, like mentally, financially, sanity wise. How do you tweet? Where do you go? I mean, this is that does happen, and you would think like, oh man, $1 million for a book over 3 years. Why aren't you doing more? Why aren't you trying faster and making more money? I think like 8 out of 10. Maybe I shouldn't put numbers on it, but I think most artists they collapse. They have some kind of they don't need the money as much. Their motivation is shot because maybe their motivation partially was to get money, and now they don't have to worry about that. It's kind of heartbreaking when I see artists I admire sort of fall off a bit because of too much success.
Yeah. Well, I think it's funny that you brought up the like a basketball because like in a lot of ways there's some weird parallels between '90s NBA and '90s comics.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, like I feel like Antoine Walker is like a perfect example of what you're talking about. But um, it's interesting because I have to imagine like somebody, let's say like you're talking about an artist who gets like $1 million deal. I have to imagine that puts a lot of pressure on them too.
Yeah. Pressure. Or it's not usually like here's all your money at once. It's like here, draw this. In theory, you'll get this. But you don't know when. You don't
Yeah.
know how it'll be divided up. Maybe it'll be a mix of the floppies plus a trade plus an option plus a movie deal.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe say they're going to buy it and they don't. That's a whole other kind of hurry up and wait type of stress.
Yeah.
Like even with our my movie deal with Mark, I don't know when this money's coming in.
Right.
Uh, I've been making less on Chrononauts so far. I chose to because it just made the math easier. But I'm in a bottleneck currently. I know once the book starts earning and I start seeing royalties, it'll all be worth it. But currently, you know, it's just as hard as it was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But the
So
thought of like seeing it blow up, seeing a comics or Hollywood Reporter talk about it, knowing the actors, which we're not allowed to say, it's yeah. I'm a guy that spends a lot of time alone in a room. I'm not equipped to think about a million people buying the book or seeing a movie or
right.
have to do with that imaginary money when it comes in.
Yeah.
I could see it really screwing up people's heads. Like it almost got me for a day.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, the mental fortitude. I mean, it's one of those things that people don't think about, and especially with so many other pressures coming from all these different directions, and it's just it.
right.
I don't envy you guys in a lot of ways. I'm gonna be totally honest.
Well, I mean, I don't want to preface this like I'm not complaining at all, and the kind of stress I'm talking about is a very weird, unusual, like 1% type stress in comics. Like Kirkman probably knows what I'm talking about. Snyder's felt it. Morrison, whatever. And it's hard to really talk about because most people, when they hear that, are just going to tell you to shut up because
Yeah.
they're at the poverty line, and they have every right to feel that way.
Yeah.
It's tough to find places where you can really be honest about that stuff.
So I'm going to kind of take it in a slightly different direction, and just because I would be very interested to see your perspective on this, but I think we were talking about creator owned, but I think one of the most interesting things in the past few years was Brian K. Vaughan and Marcos Martin just like completely ditching the publishing world and like releasing the Private Eye on the Panel Syndicate, which is a website they created themselves. And according to them, like in the back of one of the comics, they made more money doing that than they would have gotten from their page rates on Marvel and DC. What do you think of that method? Do you think that's something that people could embrace in the future?
So they didn't go through Diamond,
No, I mean it's all digital. They don't even have a print version.
right? Well, I mean, it works if you're Brian K. Vaughan.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not an answer for somebody who's never made a comic before, but
Right.
could you see more? Like, could you ever see yourself embracing digital?
Yeah. I mean, Brian changed it with Saga already.
Yeah.
If he's about to do that again, or if he's doing that again, yeah, he could absolutely turn it on its head again. And I don't think he does this to flip things around by design. I think he just tries it out. If it doesn't work, he can still pay his bills.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see him as a forerunner and taking these quote unquote chances. Um, it's strange. Like, why does Netflix work, but we can't just give Marvel Comics $10 a month and get all the comics for free? Comics are way cheaper to produce, yet Netflix can create House of Cards at a lot. I mean, how does it work? Why don't we have that system yet? Why do we still go through Diamond? For that matter, why are we still serialized? Why do we? And then you're talking about hurting the comic book shop if you take away serialization. I mean, there's a lot of questions floating around, and this by no means is settled. Like, it is still changing, and it's not gonna spit itself out for another year or two.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think at this point, comics, it's funny that comics at this point where it's about as successful as ever is also at like this incredibly fluid point where it could go a bunch of different directions.
Yeah.
And I do think that like it could move more in that direction. As far as bringing up Eric Stevenson again, I interviewed him at Emerald City Comic Con last year, and we talked about the idea of doing a creator-owned kind of Spotify, Netflix type option, and he said that they had discussed it before, but it was something that there's all these different rights and all these different having to get permission from every different creator and things like that, and then you enter into the retailer perspective. It gets it's so convoluted because there's so many different people that have a piece of that pie, I guess.
Right. I feel like when publishers theorize, I don't really tend to listen because I don't think they usually get it right. I think somebody proves a new system or a new math, and then everyone else gets on board, like what Saga did.
Right.
I've seen proposals from companies, and well, we have to release by this date. Well, why? Well, because this and that, and they're wrong. And I don't know who they're hiring or what, but I feel like comics trying to predict its own future, the companies themselves, the establishment, they're not really good at it. They're too big a ship in the water to move fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they hire people from other publishers like Penguin or Random House sometimes. Like, they seem to have the right people, but I don't know what goes on. Like, from the message of the people that know what they're talking about to the actual execution of the plan, doesn't seem to work all the time. Mostly you see big change being proven by the Brian K. Vaughns.
Right.
It's really weird. I mean, you think that Marvel and DC would have resources to really have a good battle plan, but they're mostly reactionary. You
Well,
know,
I think a lot of it's tied to the fact that there's like a certain level of like fear of change in the industry, and it's like, I mean, you look at like the format itself. I mean, the format hasn't changed since the medium was invented,
right.
and
Yeah.
like how many different industries can you really say that about?
Right. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't think comics generates the kind of capital to hire the people that really know what they're talking about.
Right,
And
that's
that
true.
does sound like I'm shitting on the industry, so I'm sorry. But
No,
if comics was making 10 times as much money, then you would see the people who work in Hollywood who probably know what they're doing more often than not, be able to step in and to really show us the psychology of what we're doing. But I don't think we don't have the capital in this industry to hire the kinds of PR people that really get it. I
Sure.
mean, the PR at Image, they suggested we announce Tokyo Ghost last year at San Diego, even though we had no idea when it was going to be out. It could
Right.
have been, it would be over a year. And I asked, well, why? Especially because I have Chrononauts coming out. Isn't that just going to confuse people? I don't know. Trust us, trust us. I still think that was a bad decision, and that's Image. He was number 2 or 3. That's how they operate sometimes. So I don't know, man.
I actually was going to mention that as one of the reasons why retailers were probably confused by Chrononauts, because Chrononauts got announced, what, like 5 months after Tokyo Ghost?
Yep,
And so they were probably like, how is he going to do both of these books?
that's right. Yeah, but I was told to me that it, this is probably going to sound like I'm throwing him under the bus a little bit, but I don't care. Image decided that they needed to have as much buzzworthy stuff at San Diego as they could because that's when everyone else announces stuff. You have 150 something announcements over the course of 5 days. And my argument was, what's the point of dropping your pants when everyone else is doing it at the same time? Like, wait for a dead weekend where nothing is happening and announce it then.
Yeah.
And I understand the temptation to like yell your property out at the big party where everyone else is yelling it out, but I don't think that's really the best move.
No, I mean it's like if you want to like do something spectacular, you don't go into a restaurant that's completely crowded with everyone yelling. You probably go into a place where you have everyone's attention.
You go to the library and you
Yeah,
yell.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, like you see it in a lot of announcements where it's like you have these. I mean, like Image themselves. I mean, you have like that was an Image Expo event, but I mean, typically like when Image does those Image Expos in January, like they're like the only game in town because like it's like
Yeah,
the dead of winter. There's no cons, no one's doing anything, and
right.
like then all of a sudden they drop like 10 books and everyone's going bananas.
Right.
And it
That's a
seems
good, yeah. Whoever makes that decision with Image, I'm not sure it's the same person that informed us. But I agree that Image does a lot of things very well. I mean, that's why they're killing it right now. So I don't mean to focus in on my one Tokyo Ghost launch, drama, but yeah, I don't know. It is hit and miss though. But I do agree. Like the Image Expo is such a huge party. Uh,
yeah.
yeah, and it's well timed because it's the dead of winter and there's nothing else going on.
Yeah, I mean it's like the one event every year that you can be certain that like a public I mean, Image is still number 3 and they're like smaller than DC by a fair amount. Who's at number 2? And but they basically lock up all the attention for everyone for an entire day.
Oh yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
I know. Marvel has a war plan against Image.
I would.
I've seen it. Oh, I've heard people talking about it, and I know. I'm sure DC does. And that's just how companies are. There's nothing new about that idea.
I've
uh,
always that's one thing I've always been kind of amazed by. Like not to go too deep into the weeds, but you would think that with the way that Image has been growing, that they would start working with their contracts that they wouldn't allow like creator-owned jobs and things like that.
yeah,
But
I
uh,
don't know.
yeah,
Their formula is essentially unchanged since it was created, and I'm not so sure. They don't. Sometimes they see themselves as a publisher. Sometimes they don't. They're just
right.
there to help you, and it's up to you to do the work.
Hmm.
And the Image thing only works. Like you hear about the success of Image books, there's probably half the books coming out now. Most people have not heard of.
Right.
I went through the list once, and I felt like it was like during the East and West and Lazarus and Manhattan, and I thought like, man, every like 80% of Image books are amazing. And then I went on the site, and I was like, oh wait, like 25% are amazing, 75 are not. So it works, but you have to be prepared to do a lot of extra work yourself. And if you don't have a good team, and if you're not following through, then it won't work for you. You're better off working a Marvel or DC.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, so to move away from that a little bit, one thing that I think is an important part of kind of your general mix as far as the business side is, you know, you do a lot for original art sales, and you work with Jason at Essential Sequential.
Right.
And one thing I'm curious about is like, how does working with a rep like that make your life easier as far as that side of your business? Because if you're drawing all the time, it's gonna be hard to be packaging and selling everything, right?
That's right, yeah. And what works for me in art sales is very different than what works for Fiona, what works for Ryan Otley. Um, there really isn't like a single rule about selling art. So there's artists who I think are really talented but don't sell art for some reason, and I couldn't tell you why. Um, for me, like half my sales one year were original art based. Now it's maybe like a third or a quarter, but it's still enough. And I pay Jason 20% to do all the shipping, packing. I'm not good at that stuff, and I'm not. I'm happy to pay somebody to sort of be organized for me and keep track of everything.
Hmm.
And it's nice to have a buffer between you and the customer.
Sure.
It's sort of like the psychology of like, oh, I represent Sean Murphy, you know. I mean, if people really are upset with how their art purchase goes, they can contact me directly, and I can help. But usually that doesn't happen. But I think the benefit of working with Jason, and I think Fiona and Mateo and a lot of us would agree, is if going to conventions is really handy for him to just lasso all the tables up, get us a good spot,
Yeah.
um, give me a window of when you want me to come by. He's upgraded my room for me because he has good like frequent flyer miles and all kinds of stuff. I'm not good at any of that stuff, so I'm happy to just see him work. To me, like that's when he becomes the artist because it's an amazing ballet that he performs at shows.
Yeah, so I'm also working on a piece about comic art sellers, and I'm talking with Jason about it, and some other people, and one artist I talked to specifically said he mentioned you know how getting a hotel room for San Diego is terrible. He said he doesn't because his rep always does it for him, and
Right.
and that's got to be super nice. I mean, those types of things, like like you said, people can sell their own art, and and it probably works really well for a lot of people. But those types of things, like it frees up time for you to draw.
Right. Well, it's part of the thing that I appreciate more about making it in this industry is spotting the bad personality and avoiding it.
Yeah,
Spotting the people that are good and reliable and appreciating them, why they're better friends. And I think part of success is delegating responsibility and freeing yourself up to do the things you'd rather do, and with us, make more money. If I had to ship and package everything, I'd lose 2 hours a day, and 2 hours for me, I could do two high-end commissions. That's money gone. Like I'm losing money if I do it myself at that point.
right.
Um, so I feel like yeah, we got really lucky with Essential Sequential because the artists really do respect each other. There's no like, why is he with our group
Right.
type of talk really, and usually I guess we're kind of cliquey. We're happy to just quick, let's go to dinner before anyone else finds us. We'll
Yeah.
avoid the party.
Yeah, I was actually talking. I was talking to somebody about Essential Sequential the other day, and about how like when you go to New York Comic Con, and I really like New York Comic Con's Artist Alley. It's always amazing because he's like the only vendor who actually, or rep who actually manages to like get everyone together, and like you see that purple branding for Essential Sequential, and it's like
Yeah,
it's actually it's pretty damn impressive.
yeah. I mean, he's got a fanny pack though. He's got a fanny pack with money in it, and he's got iPads going sometimes. He had an overhead projector once. The purple banners. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, because he's got some of the my favorite people in the industry. Those people are in high demand at shows. So Jason helps those artists, but those artists help Jason.
Yeah,
Like if you make Fiona, Dave Johnson, and Mateo unhappy as a promoter, then Jason's going to be affected, and then you're going to have a hard time getting me next year.
right.
So it stands to reason that you want to please Dave Johnson and Fiona and Jason, and if it makes them happy to have a line by the door all in a row with purple banners, then it's a good investment.
Yeah. Well, and you also, transition time. So you Jason was selling Cafe Racer on Essential Sequential, and Cafe Racer was the art book that you released from the first Murphy apprenticeship, and so you just announced that soon you'll be accepting applications for the second year. Why'd you decide that you want to do that again?
Well, our plan, my wife and I, our plan was to do it at least 3 times and then see how we felt.
Sure.
Uh, we found it really spiritually fulfilling to do that stuff. We can't have kids, So in a way, we think of it as a nice way to give back. I get to talk about my bullshit in a safe environment with students who are willing to listen and you know not hit the internet immediately after and tell people what I've been saying.
Yeah.
uh, so it works out for everybody, and yeah, I mean, I ended up being really good friends with all of them. Basically, they paid me to be their friends. And I mean, I to this even afterwards, I ended up like helping out with deals, looking at contracts. I'd read over emails and say, "Oh, you should probably respond this way. Don't seem too eager," or "This is when you lie. Just draw pages for Batman and say you're doing it for DC." Marvel doesn't need to know that DC is not paying you or whatever you are. Just lie
Yeah.
because there's no way of checking. So stuff like that, and if there's drama. If I can help, I will. So yeah, and I'm happy to do whatever I can. I have a pretty good placement rate so far. I think we have like 80% of people, which is 4 people, placed. If you
Yeah.
want to call it that. But I don't know. I like doing it because I know I'm providing a better service than the college I went to for way cheaper.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
and it like that. You had mentioned how you're like talking about contract or helping them with contracts and things like that. I think that like that's. I mean, I got this. I got this book in the mail today. I always get these random books from Random House, and I have absolutely no idea why, but they keep sending them to me. And it was about the art of self-publishing comics, and
right.
there was like nothing in it about the business side. And I think it was put together by one of those universities or something like that. And then there's you're talking about the universities. I don't think that that's a factor, and I think that's kind of a hole in the schooling part because you have practical application. You've experienced this type of thing, and you can tell them the types of things that they can expect. And I think that type of thing is really invaluable.
Right. Yeah, no, I'd like to think so too. And I agree with you about college. I mean, I went to SCAD Savannah. I did not love it. I was probably a difficult student because I was bored and I thought I was a know-it-all, and I was the kind of guy that you wouldn't want to teach. But they didn't have a book about reading contracts. I'm sorry, a class. They didn't have a class about investing or doing your taxes or saving money or how to just none of that stuff. They didn't tell you to go to shows. They didn't provide like Savannah is not too far from Orlando Comic Con
Right.
or MegaCon. Why wasn't there a bus put together where you could pitch in and everyone would share rooms? And is it insurance or is it the professors working there? Many of them have not had much professional experience in the world and they don't know. I think it's probably that. It's probably the latter.
Yeah.
And I feel like, they teach you art and it's great. And that's probably the height of most artists' careers. It's their collegiate career because you really do get to feel like you're a real artist because you're doing it all the time. Once you
Hmm.
graduate, a huge percent of you never ever work in that field ever again.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of artists that I talk to, like, some will move into like advertising, some will move into like storyboarding for movies or TV shows or animation and things like that.
Yeah.
Um,
And that counts. That's a good place
oh,
to
it
be.
is, it
Uh,
is.
that's still a very small percentage of people that most people go home and work in something art related altogether, which is really sad.
Yeah, I remember talking to an artist, and it wasn't even like an unsuccessful artist. It was an artist that people know, and he said that he's like, sometimes I have to choose between like doing a book for like, you know, X publisher where I make $600,
Hmm.
or taking this gig for Nike who will pay me $60,000 for like 3 months, and
Oh
it's
yeah,
like when you do
yeah.
something like that, like the math, it's just it doesn't add up.
If you got kids in college and you're paying insurance, and I've gotten to take some chances because I've chosen not to have kids and was single for a while, but um, yeah, a lot of people, they have kids right out of college, and it makes it harder, and that's their life choice, of course. But I can see really being under the gun, being stressed out. Yeah, I know at the height of my stress point in my career, I don't think I've been as stressed out as a guy who's got kids, college, and health problems. He's the household income. Like that to me is way worse than anything I've ever experienced. And there's a lot of people in the industry like that.
Yeah. Well, so um, this will be my last question because I've had you for a good while now. But one thing that I'd be curious about, do you like? it seems to me that a lot of, and I'm not trying to like downplay any artists or anything like that, but it seems like a lot of times people are just kind of happy getting what they get because they're doing what they love. Like
Yeah,
people are passionate about their art, they're
yeah,
artists, they want to tell the stories they want, and or they want to tell the stories about characters that they've always loved. And it seems like that artistic integrity side kind of overwhelms the business side. And do you think do you think it's valuable for artists to stand up a bit more, I guess, for like, their own value?
yeah. Certainly for themselves, they Marvel and DC benefit by artists thinking that they should be grateful. You know,
Yeah.
and at Marvel, I've heard stories where there's almost like subtle psychological warfare.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we'll give you any book you want. This is what do you mean you need more money? We just gave you, Deadpool. This is your favorite character. Blah blah blah. They sling you that. They absolutely sling you that. And I had a meeting with Marvel, and they said, "Who's your favorite character?" And I said, "Benjamin Franklin." And I said, "I don't. I love Gambit, but that does not matter right now because my wife doesn't know who Gambit is. She just needs me to get to be paid."
Yeah.
Sorry, and I know asking around, I think maybe I'm 1 out of 10 people that has that inclination to at least ask.
Right.
I feel like you said, with a lot of artists, it's just not there. The creative intelligence and practical business intelligence are very different parts of the brain, and it's rare to see them mixed in one person. I think of like Mark Millar, for example. Somebody I saw was sort of teasing that, oh, he's just a movie comics guy. He's not very deep, or I don't know, whatever the attack is on him. Oh, he's too commercial and successful, and we're jealous. But I said, the Mark cracked the movie comics code.
Yeah.
He's the first. He that is an art form in itself.
Right.
You gotta call him P.T. Barnum, fine, but that is an art. Like slinging that for a living and doing it well, and doing it over and over again, that is art. And
Yeah.
and writing also is art. But I mean, these emails that I would get from him, I mean, just the information he's collected, the things he knows about Will Eisner, Frank Miller, like the best advice, the worst advice, the numbers, the team he has. It is insane. It is amazing. Like, I wish I could share the emails with people, but I won't because they're super confidential. But yeah, I look at a guy like Mark, and I'm just honored to have gotten some of that information from him. And I'm not just trying to kiss up because he and I are working together, but it really was cool to sort of meet somebody that had done that so well. That's like what I would do if I was a writer.
Right.
I feel, at least I'd try. And just when I go to other creators and sort of talk about this stuff, most of them their eyes glaze over. They're like, "What? Oh, I'm just happy to draw Deadpool." So I end up keeping it to myself. I'm thrilled to actually talk to you about this stuff because I don't know where this thought process would go otherwise. But I love this is my favorite subject, and very few people in comics really want to talk about it.
Oh, well, I thought that that's why you'd be a perfect person to talk about it because it seems like you've always had kind of a mind for it in an industry that doesn't really think about those things. And
Yeah, I hope maybe.
and I think it's funny that you talked about Mark because I'm like I'm in, I was actually made fun of a lot at Multiversity because I was always like I'm Team Millar, and I think he writes really entertaining stuff, and I think that there's this weird, it's kind of like with any medium, but there's like this weird, people don't like saying things are commercial. People don't like commercial because there's
Right.
like it's like it loses the art. But I don't think what Mark does like it's tell me like another writer that could write Starlight, that could write Chrononauts, and could write Kick-Ass. I mean,
Right.
those are such different books, and like they can like some of them are just purely commercial, and some of them like Starlight that's like an emotional that's got a hell of an emotional arc to it, and it
Yeah, it
helps that
does.
he's got Goran Parlov on that book. Don't get me wrong,
Oh. Yeah, yeah.
but I mean, like, I feel like to a certain degree, like it's like that type of mentality is torn down when it should be respected a lot more, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, what even if you don't, I love Mark's stuff because I find that he writes comics for me.
Right.
I don't read a whole lot, but I like Mark's stuff because it's written for people that are just outside of comics.
Yeah.
It's very approachable and very. I mean, it doesn't. It's so fast paced. It's just beat after beat that it doesn't get as nuanced as Watchmen, maybe. But I love that he's able to do that, and I feel like when people pick on someone like that, 9% of the time it's just jealousy, and Mark knows that, and he's got way better things to do than sweat people that would sling that at him. And I
Yeah.
feel if people review him and don't respect him, then they're reviewing things as fans, not as professionals. Because a professional would look at Mark and give him proper approval for what he's managed to do.
Yeah.
But if you can say about him, if he just have a negative tint to him, no matter what, then you're not a professional because you don't understand how hard it was to do what he did. You're just a guy who reads his stories and you don't love his movies, and that's a closed case for you, and that's very myopic.
Well, yeah, and that's I think one of the things that I think is most impressive about him, not to turn this into the Mark Millar fan club podcast, but so in the survey that I've done, over half the people say that they've worked with a collaborator that they felt was untrustworthy.
Yeah.
And the thing, when you look at Mark Millar's career, like look at the people who work with him. Like you have and you have like Frank Whiteley, and you have Brian Hitch, and you have John Romita Jr. and all these different legends. And they
Right.
not only did they work with him to start with, but they come back. And so it seems fairly evident to me that he treats his collaborators really well, and I think that is a really underrated characteristic in a creator.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I did not sell Chrononauts. I did not. I don't. Some part of me feels like I don't deserve any of. If there is a movie, if it does well, I don't feel like I deserve half of whatever the fee is, because Mark did the legwork. Like, I draw scripts no matter what. He gave me one that was really up my alley and fun. But as far as like all the other buzz that comes with it, I feel like somebody picked me up with a crane and just brought me to a magical island. And like, I'm super thrilled, and it keeps me motivated to produce my best for him and on time. Um, even my lawyer was looking through the contracts when we first were getting it, and as any lawyer will do, they want to argue a little bit more in your favor. But she was telling me, like, this is really, really generous. He doesn't have to give you any of this stuff.
Yeah.
This is an amazing, amazing deal. And the fact that he has these movies already they're already in DVD form. I mean, come on, it's crazy. So that's probably the biggest reason why people keep coming back. Plus, he's so easy to work with.
Yeah.
I've never gotten 4 issues at once, or all the dialogue complete. Usually, it's like, here's issue 1, and issue 2 may have dialogue, and issue 3 is some ideas, and then you draw the rest.
We'll go Marvel style.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading. I read Chrononauts 3 in at my lunchtime today, just because I was like, I should probably read that before I talk to you. And
Oh,
man, that montage that I was just reading, that I was like, holy shit! There's a car chase throughout time. I'm trying to imagine how much that I think you had mentioned when we talked about it originally that like there's one sequence that I think your wife said. That it was like he was writing something that was directly from your brain or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She heard the basic pitch, and she goes, "That sounds like something that you would write for yourself."
Yeah.
Honestly, I did the book called Off Road back in 2004
Yeah.
or whatever. It's basically the same kind of setup. An off-roading adventure through time. One guy pitches the other guy, and let's do it. Come on. One guy's blonde, one guy's brunette. It really was very familiar and fun to do.
Mm-hmm.
But that car chase scene, like, I was thrilled to do it, and I asked for it. But every day it was like, research a new era, so that historians will know that you have the correct amount of pop rivets on that World War I tank that was used in the Battle of the Somme or whatever, and then switch the page. Now, I want you to fool someone who knows Roman history and get all the armor correct. And you could research that stuff forever and still not get it right. But every page felt like a new book that I was doing. And in one sense, I got to scratch a lot of itches because I got to draw samurais, I got to draw, Rome, Egypt, whatever. I didn't really get to spend too much time in each one, but I got to do like a quick pass on a lot of different genres, which I've always wanted to do. So if
Yeah,
I do tomorrow, I can say my genre hopping has actually fulfilled a lot of bucket list desires. And
yeah. Well,
those,
it definitely comes across in the book. It's a very fun book. I mean, it's kind of what I imagined I would get from a book from the two of you, and I mean that in like the most complimentary way I possibly
thanks,
can.
man. Well,
Um,
I think that we both have more serious books in mind, and we're gonna do them, after this, I'm sure. But we really were just excited to have a a fun book that was mostly comedy. Not as deep as some other stuff you might read, but I don't know, man, just fun with a capital F.
yeah, I mean,
It's a nice, relaxing break from all the other sort of darker, macabre stuff we've been working on.
yeah, I mean, you got to draw a character flipping off Morrissey. That's definitely not something you get every week.
Oh yeah, actually, that wasn't in the script. I put that in there. One day, I will go through those books and tell you what I added and Mark does not add, and how lucky I am he let me get away with it.
I feel like it was I I feel like that was possibly ripped from Time. I wouldn't be surprised.
I'm sure someone has flipped off Morrissey at least once.
I have absolutely no doubt. I have no doubt.